entrepreneur is somebody who ultimately sees a business through to fruition or a nonprofit enterprise through to fruition. And what we wanted to really do in the context of life entrepreneurship was to understand how have people been able to assume that same entrepreneurial mindset but apply it to every facet of life. So the same way that an entrepreneur, whether it's in the business context or the nonprofit context, sees a new opportunity, is able to look at how that opportunity might fit within the broader context of the world around them, and is able to see very clearly where they want to take that opportunity in terms of an innovative idea or an innovative solution, and have been very good about drawing the resources in to make that idea a reality. A life entrepreneur is able to do that in every facet of their life, to ultimately create what we call the good life, or what others have also called the good life. So we see the good life as being living in a place that you love, surrounded by the people that you love, doing the things that you love. And a life entrepreneur is able to figure out, okay, where are there opportunities for me to do that in my life, and bring that same kind of entrepreneurial spirit to making that a reality. So what we find is that the social entrepreneur or the business entrepreneur fundamentally understands the entrepreneurial mindset. They are willing to assume a measure of risk. If they've got a big idea, they go for it. They tend to be very good about pulling people around them and being resourceful and really adapting and persisting through various challenges that present themselves, especially on the professional side. And so if they are able to then make that jump and say, okay, now how does that apply to the rest of my life? It begins to become a very rich and fulfilling cycle. We strongly believe that a life entrepreneur and an entrepreneur writ large is going to have to assume a measure of risk in order to pursue their passion, to pursue their purpose. And taking that risk is also incumbent upon being a good risk mitigator. So among the 55 people that we interviewed for our book, they were actually on a relatively normal distribution of risk. So some were, ready to throw themselves off out of an airplane tomorrow, and a number were actually quite risk averse. But all of them had assumed a measure of risk at one point or another in their lives in order to live something that was much more in keeping with who they were as people. And in talking to them, what was interesting is that all of them assumed a measure of risk, but every single one of them, to a person, said that the number one thing that they were really concerned about was risk mitigation. Paying close attention to where were the major challenges that were going to face them. How could they actually anticipate those as much as they possibly could, and then gather the resources around them in terms of a support network and various other kinds of resources which would allow them to overcome those challenges and obstacles as they presented themselves. So that's one key factor there, is that you've got to assume a measure of risk, but you've got to be a good risk mitigator at the same time. The same idea too applies to this calculation of failure. And being worried about failure. And I think the number one thing holding a lot of people back from following this entrepreneurial life is the fear of failure. And so ultimately, if you look at, there's an interesting equation that began to emerge out of our interviews, which is you look at the cost of failure. So let's say you start something and you fall flat on your face, or you pursue something and you fall flat on your face. Ultimately, that cost will be somewhat compensated for by the value of the experience itself. The kinds of learning that you get that comes out of taking that kind of risk, the kind of new relationships that you're able to develop because you put yourself out of your comfort zone, the kind of learning you get by trying new things and doing new things and getting into new places, that when you put those two things together, cost of failure plus value of experience, far exceeds the cost of regret. Right? So when you bring that cost of regret into that calculation, you see that the cost of regret is far heavier, far bigger, far more serious and consequential than the potential cost of failure, plus the value of experience. Because inevitably that almost ends up to be a break even, if not a positive. And almost all of my experiences have always been positive. And as a result of that, I've been very lucky in the fact that I have very few regrets in my life. And most of the people that we talked to in the course of our interviews had very few regrets in their life, because when things were going in the wrong direction, they felt empowered to do something about it, and make that change and pursue something that really was much more in keeping with who they were as individuals and change makers. For the world right now, we're going through such a massive shift and such a massive change and so much disruption that's happening. The people who are most attuned to those kinds of opportunities are ultimately going to be the ones who are able to make the most significant contribution, I think. And we also need to recognize the fact that it's not just about awakening to opportunity, but it's actually being able to clearly articulate what the vision is moving forward. And so the people who are really going to be the significant change makers are the ones who are going to be able to come up with a vision of what the future should look like, and articulate it then in such a way that it gets other people excited and passionate about and ready to pursue it and ready to follow it. And then it is also the person who is going to be the change maker of the future is going to be the person who's able to not only have a strong vision for where it needs to go, but are actually able to be really smart and goal-oriented and strategic to figure out, okay, now we know where the vision is. How do we get there? How do we take the next few steps that we need to in order to make this a reality, and what kinds of resources do we need to be able to make this happen? So by having a vivid vision of the future and being able to get a large population behind that vision and excited about where that's going to go, and having a really clear strategy for how to make that happen, you're going to see people who are able to then lead us out these challenging times and into very exciting times. I see that happening right now, for example, in the green technology sector. People are beginning to emerge with some really powerful ideas for what's the future of solar energy, for example, or what's the future of water, and what is water going to look like in this world 20, 30, 40 years out.